Okay, so today I'm going to show you how to use the Metabot to create a data-centric app using the built-in NoSQL database. Okay, so in our Metabot, we're going to go straight to the Libraries tab, and we're going to create a new library, and I'm just going to call it Demo. And in our Demo library, I'm going to create a new control called My Data List. All right, create. Okay, let's go ahead and edit this new control. Now, I'm just going to paste in some stuff so you don't have to watch me type text, but we're going to start out with a very simplified user interface. I'm going to go ahead and expand this so you can see what's going on here. We're going to create a very simple table. And inside of our table, we're going to have two columns. We're going to have one row, two columns. The first column is going to be a form that allows us to edit our data. I'm going to paste that in there, and you can see it's basically we've got 5 fields, right? Labels and fields. And if we go ahead and take a look at this, you can see what we've got. We've got 5 fields and their text areas and an add button. That's it, right? Okay. The other thing we're going to add is a second column, and in the second column we're going to have an area for our actual list to be displayed in real time, right? It's just going to have a simple heading and then a div where we're going to stick the data in, right? Very simple, no frills user interface. All right, so that's it for the HTML. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to JavaScript at this point. Now, in the JavaScript, we're going to do a couple of things. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to maintain a list, right? So we're going to just create a variable to hold our list. And then when we start up, we're going to want to read that list from the database, right? And so here is the basic code to read the data from the database. Now, a couple of things about this. First and foremost, there's one JavaScript file that pretty much makes all of the magic of Metabot happen. It turns controls into web pages, and it's in the bot manager, and it's called API.js. And that API.js has all of the functions that manage the controls and assemble them into your web page based on the rules that are outlined basically on our documentation page. If you go to newbound.io/documentation, you can read all about it. In any case, one of the functions that the API.js file brings, or script brings to the table, is this JSON function, and it's just a shortcut for calling commands in the Newbound framework. It's just very succinct. So behind the scenes, it uses a WebSocket or Ajax, depending on your settings. The default is the WebSocket. Again, read the docs if you want to learn more about that. JSON basically takes 3 parameters. First of all, the relative URL for the command that we're invoking. The second parameter is the list of query string parameters, or the list of parameters for that function in query string parameter format. And then third, there's a function that's a callback that's called once the command has completed executing and passes in a result. So this is how you do a basic read. Since the read command is a function of the bot manager or app manager app, the URL, since we're in a different app, is always up one directory, name of the bot or app, and then name of the command. In any case, the read command takes two parameters. First of all is the name of the library or database, DB. The DB parameter is the name of the library that you want to use. In this case, we're using a library called My Data Library. You want to use a library that's not a part of your application. When you publish your application, if the library is part of it, then the data will get published with it. If it's runtime data that should sit on the local machine and not be transferred when you make a copy of the app, then you want to put it in an external library that's not going to be distributed with the app. So in this case, our app is in the demo library. I'm creating this new library called My Data Library, and I'm going to create a new ID for my top level data of my data list. Now obviously these values can be whatever is appropriate to your application. Now it should be pointed out that this library, My Data Library, does not at this point exist. The first time you run this app, that library exists nowhere on the local instance. Another thing that should be pointed out, I'm going to go ahead and save this so we can come back to it, but you can also test commands in your browser using pretty much the exact same format. So if here, for example, if we go to bot manager read, db equals my data library, and ID equals my data list, right? It's going to tell us error, status error, no such database, doesn't exist. However, for the purposes of our app, what we're going to do is we're going to say if the result is okay, then we're going to take that value. Otherwise, we'll just leave it as an empty list. So the first time we go through here, we're going to get an error, and it's not going to grab the data, but it's going to fall back to the original value, which is an empty list, which is fine, right? The other thing we're going to do when it comes back is, we're going to say, otherwise, create a new database. If the status is not okay, the most likely cause of that is that the database doesn't exist, or that no row with that ID or no record with that ID exists. Either way, we're just going to call new DB, and we're going to ignore the results because the only reason it would possibly fail is your disk is full or the database already exists. In either case, we're totally fine with that. And then the final thing that we're going to do is we're going to call our rebuild function. Now that we've gotten the data out of the database, we're going to rebuild. And for now, I'm just going to gloss over the rebuild function. We're going to stub it out. Because we don't have any data to show, so we'll circle back to the rebuild function in a little bit. All right. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a functionality for our add record button. Right? If you recall here, I'm going to go ahead and save and refresh the page. You can see we've got this button here at the bottom called add record. And we're going to preview here this button right here, add. So we're going to add a click functionality to that button now. Okay, and the first thing we're going to do when you click on that button is we're going to grab the data out of the 5 fields in our form, right? So we're just going to grab the values into local variables, and then we're going to create a record variable that represents that data, right? So we just created a little JSON structure here with each of our attributes, field 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and their values, right? 5 name value pairs in our JSON data. All right, so then finally what we're going to do is we're going to add that record to our list, and then we're going to save our list. Right? Okay, so the save list function doesn't exist. Let's go ahead and write that real quick. How about that? Okay, so our save list function, instead of calling the bot manager's read or new DB commands, we're going to call the write command, right? Okay, so we're going to, first of all, we're going to format our data, because all data that gets stored in the NoSQL database has to be a proper JSON object. And since our data is a list, we're going to have to create an object and make that list an attribute of it. Then we're just going to call the bot manager's write command. We're going to tell it what library we want to put it in. We're going to tell it what ID we want to save it as. And then, because object data is not string data that you can pass in a URL, we're going to have to encode it as a URI component. And first, we're going to have to turn it into a string. So JSON stringified data gives us a nice string safe representation of our data object, and then our encode URI component turns that into something you can stick in a URL. And then for our callback function, once it's saved, we're just going to tell it to rebuild our list. So I think all of the exciting parts are done except for actually building our list. What does rebuilding our list look like? Well, we're just going to create a very simple table, and we're going to iterate through our list of records, and we're going to create a row for each record and a cell for each record field. And that's really it. We've got one more chunk of code here, and that is the code that pardon me. That's the code that sets the HTML in our placeholder div. So let's go ahead and add that in here. Now, there's one other piece, and that is I added a little delete button here as the first cell in the row. And so I gave each of those delete buttons a class of delete record. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a click function, a click behavior, to each of those little trash can icons. And we're going to take advantage of jQuery's chaining capability. And since jQuery has this nice tendency to pass out the same DOM element that was passed into it for most or many of its functions, we can chain a lot of them together. So after we've set the HTML for our list goes here div, we're going to find within it anything of class delete record. And then for those, we are going to set a click function, click behavior. Right? And so what do we want our delete record, our trash can buttons to do? Well, basically, we want to delete that record, that row from the list, and then save the list again. Now, the other interesting thing that I did here is in the delete button itself, I set a data attribute, a data index attribute, to the row number of the data that that row represents. So basically, we can pull that data index attribute out of the thing that was clicked, and then we know which row we want to delete. So we just splice the row at that index and save the list again. Okay? And I believe, knock on wood, that's actually all of the code. So let's go ahead and preview this app. All right. I'm going to try just putting in some random data here. I'm going to try adding it to the list. Okay, so you can see that now my data list has 1 row. I'm going to click a couple more times. We got 3 rows. All right, I'm going to refresh the page and click preview, and you can see that's persistent data, right? That got stored in the database. Now, if you click on one of these trash cans, it should go ahead and all right, so let's add a couple more rows here. Right? Okay, so now you can tell that when I delete a specific row, that specific row disappears. Okay, and that's really all it takes to create a data-centric application using the Metabot and 4 simple commands: read, write, new DB, and delete. We didn't use the delete. And there's also the convert DB function, but you can look those up. They're in the documentation as well. So thank you for joining me today. I hope this has shed a little bit of light on how we do things here in the Newbound sphere, and I hope it's not too strange or foreign, but I hope it kind of fits in with the way you're already doing things, because that's our goal here, and we want to make your job easier. So until next time, keep coding.